been a rabbi now for about 5.5 years. And one of the parts of the rabbinate that I don't want to say I particularly enjoyed, because it sounds too morbid to say that, but that I find very meaningful is that I'm there for life cycle events, particularly funerals. When you're sitting with a family that's facing a loss, you can see the impact that you're making. You can feel the connection in a way that you don't always feel when you give a class or a sermon or a program in a large group. You know the difference that you're making. And I don't have the exact numbers, but I've probably officiated 75, 80 funerals in my time. And one of the really meaningful parts of that has been being able to officiate and share the stories of those who are survivors. And at the same time, there's a side of that I recognize as I get more and more of these funerals, that those who survive are getting older and older. And each year there are fewer and fewer people who can say they experienced the horrors of the Shoah directly, who can share a first-hand account of what happened and what they experienced. This last week, actually, one of my former congregants from my previous synagogue, Gerda Freeberg, who some of you may know, passed away. She was one of the founders of the Toronto Holocaust Education Memorial Center. And I remember early on in my rabbinate when I first came to Toronto, she took me out for a cup of coffee and to give me a tour of the museum and the exhibits, to share a bit of her own story with me and the stories that are there, that are captured in that memorial, in that place of memory. A few years ago, there was a study that was done in the United States that showed just how few people know really a lot about the Holocaust. How many people had totally wrong numbers, dates, the history, just a generation later, forgotten by so many. There were 9.5 million Jews in Europe before the war began. 6 million of them were murdered by the Nazis and their collaborators. 3 million Jews from Poland alone perished and were murdered in the Shoah. Over 1 million alone in Auschwitz. Later this month, January 27th, will mark 78 years since Auschwitz was liberated. A child who was just 10 at the time it was liberated would be 88 today. Let me give you a few more statistics. Just over a third of Europe's Jewish community were still alive when the war ended. Roughly 300,000 or so of them survived in the concentration camps. Others survived in hiding, either in basements and attics, posing as non-Jews, being saved by their neighbors, hiding in forests, some of them fighting as partisans. And the largest group of those who survived were those who were able to escape, who were able to find refuge in other countries and get out of Europe. Of the 300,000 that went to Russia, they didn't face particularly great conditions there either, work camps and labor. According to the Claims Conference, the organization that deals with reparations for survivors and their families, in 2020, they estimated that there were 400,000 survivors that were still alive. They estimate that in 2030, that number will be less than 100,000. And the question is, why am I sharing all of these statistics with you and these numbers? And I promise I'll return to that, but I want to take a pause and look at a midrash about our parsha. In our parsha, Jacob passes away, and his sons take him to be buried in the land of Israel with his fathers. Joseph, at the end of our parsha, when he dies, has his children make him a promise. Not to take him immediately and bury him in Israel, but that someday, when the Jewish people leave Egypt, to bring him with them. And the Midrash tells us that right when the Israelites were preparing to leave Egypt, and they were collecting gold and treasures and other fortunes from the Egyptians, Moses was nowhere to be found. Where was he? He was digging up and preparing the coffin to bring Joseph back to the land of Israel. And as they marched through the desert, their tradition teaches that they carried with them two different arks. One of them, the Ark of the Covenant, the Sefer Torah, our holiest, most valuable, precious treasure as a people. And the other, Joseph's coffin. It's interesting, in Hebrew it's the same word, aron. And so today we have many books, documents, movies, and more that tell us the story of the Shoah. We have lists of names. Yad Vashem holds the largest record, nearly 5 million names. But still, it's over 1 million names that are unaccounted for. Simply names that are lost to history. Their entire family, their friends, their community, anyone who knew them, any evidence that they ever lived on this earth was erased with them when they were murdered by the Nazis. And the reason I'm sharing this is the reason our tradition teaches that alongside the one ark, they also carried the ark, the coffin of Yosef. Because when people would ask the Israelites marching through the desert when they came upon them why they're carrying this beautiful, ornate ark with their holy treasure and the other a coffin, and they're treating the two as equal, they would reply, they are equal. The person in that one lived the words in that one. And there's a lesson in there. Because we can have books with statistics, we can have documents, and we can have records that account for what happened. But it's the people, the lived experience of those events that truly matter. Torah isn't passed down by reading it. It's passed down from parent to child by living it. And so is the memory of the Shoah. There'll be a generation, sadly far too soon, when no one will be able to say firsthand that they experienced it. Will be able to share their story directly. And people will learn about the Shoah through books and movies, through classes. But we all know that history is constantly rewritten. We see it happening now in Poland. Polish laws forbidding someone from saying that the Polish people collaborated with the Nazis. It's forbidden to teach that in Poland. I know it's not the case because I've heard firsthand from so many who lived there, who experienced their neighbors, people they thought that were their friends, their community, turning on them so quickly. In some cases, even before the Nazis came to town, the moment law and order ceased, they were ready to kill, to murder, to steal from, and abuse their Jewish neighbors. But what happens when no one is around to tell those stories? And those who want to rewrite the facts and the history and read the evidence in a different way want to proclaim that the Polish people on the whole didn't participate. They weren't collaborators. They were victims of the Nazis, just like the Jews among them. We see movies all the time that take a little bit of artistic leeway to tell a story. Jojo Rabbit was a very nice movie, but its story about a German boy and a German officer saving Jews may have been heartwarming. But we know that was not often the case. Similarly, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. These movies make us feel something, but those who lived it can tell us that's not the truth. That's not the story that really happened. So what happens when those people are no longer here to tell that story? Elie Wiesel, perhaps the most famous and well-known survivor, may his memory be a blessing, once said, if we forget the dead will be killed a second time, and then they are today's victims. We have to be prepared to always remember. Not just the facts and the statistics. Because even in a room like this, I saw it. When you're presented with numbers, our eyes glaze over. It's hard to really comprehend what 1 million, or 3 million, or 6 million, or 1/3 of the Jewish population of a continent really means. But the stories, the first-hand accounts. For so many of us in this room, it might be your parents' or grandparents' story. For some of you in this room, it's your own story. We have to pass those stories on. We have to carry them on, just like the bones of Yosef, remembering the person, not just the numbers, remembering the values as they were lived out, not just the teachings of the text. Today we finish the book of Vayechi. What do we do next? We read the book of Shemot. And after that, we go to the next and the next and the next, and we finish the 5 books of the Torah. We go back to the beginning and we retell them. The Israelites may have carried Joseph's bones in the Torah through the desert, but we've carried it. Each of us who are here today have carried it through the generations. We've carried it through history. We've made sure that neither is forgotten. Not the stories of those who came before us, and not the teachings of our traditions. And along the way, in each generation, we've added new teachings, new lessons, new meaning. We've added bits of our own stories to that, and we've carried it on from one generation to the next. So today, this Shabbat, we have to continue to do that. And I pray that we as a people have the strength and the ability, the perseverance, the dedication to never let those stories be forgotten, to carry not just the facts and figures, but the people who perished with us, to carry their memories and to pass them on to the next generation. And if we can do that, and the same thing we say as we end a book of the Torah, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazeh, be strong, and we'll strengthen one another. It is carrying both the facts and the figures alongside the people, the memories, the story, the lived experience that strengthens us as a people. And I pray that we never forget that. We never forget them. We continue to fulfill this mission. Shabbat Shalom.